Welcome to episode 2 of Together We Awaken, Finding Light in the Dark. I'm Allison Bruner, a spiritual guide and healing practitioner. And if you're listening to this, you might feel like everything in your life is unraveling or has already unraveled, and you're in this sort of strange place between initial loss and what's to come, which is a rebirth. Heck, you might not even know that a rebirth is coming and are just feeling completely lost. Maybe nothing makes sense anymore. Maybe you're exhausted and confused, frustrated, and wondering where the universe, God, divine creator, went. Maybe you feel abandoned by God, by your guides, by life itself. But I want you to know something. You're not lost. You're actually being found. And you're not failing. As I said in the last episode, you are metamorphosing into something more. Last episode, we talked about the initial descent into the dark night of the soul, and today we're diving into the dark night of the soul itself, what it is, why it happens, how it's shown up in the lives of mystics and seekers before us, and how to navigate it when it feels like the world is crumbling beneath you. Because, as I mentioned last time, there is a collective dark night of the soul occurring for people all over the planet. So, what exactly is a dark night of the soul? It's not a new concept, and it's a term that comes from Saint John of the Cross, who was a 16th century Spanish mystic. He wrote a poem titled, gosh, I hope I can pronounce this, La Noche Oscura del Alma. Spanish is not one of the languages that I've spent much time learning. It's more French, so I might have put a little bit of the French in there. But the dark night of the soul, he describes, is a time of deep spiritual crisis where the presence of God, if you will, seems to vanish. And when it happened to him, it left him in a feeling of total darkness and emptiness. And this was not just a personal struggle, it was a transformation. The soul, stripped of all illusions, is forced into a state of surrender, into deeper faith, and into an entirely new way of being. But St. John of the Cross was not alone in his experience. Um, every spiritual tradition speaks about it. There was Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night before his crucifixion. He experienced his own dark night. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he fell to the ground in a state of anguish and prayed, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. It was a moment of total surrender. He knew, what was coming. He knew that his path would require great sacrifice, pain, and the complete dismantling of life as he knew it. And he knew he probably had another choice. I was going to say he had no choice but to surrender. But the thing is, we do have a choice not to surrender. I'll say from experience, but that creates more suffering and it prolongs the dark night of the soul. My greatest, most challenging, and longest dark night went on because I have the gift of stubbornness and strong willpower. And I tried to use my human willpower to overcome the dark night of the soul, but you can't. You can't. It only prolongs it. And in the end, the soul wins. So, for you who are going through a dark night today, this moment holds profound wisdom. Sometimes we're led into the dark not because we're being abandoned or punished, but because we're being prepared for something greater. We are becoming something greater. We're already great, but there's more. Thomas Merton was also a 20th century Trappist monk. He wrote about the death of the false self. He spoke about how the dark night is a time when everything we built our identity around begins to fall away. This was what my biggest dark night of the soul was all about. All of the false personas had to shed. In fact, holding them in place, wearing the masks that I used to in order to get love made me sick. I mentioned this in the last episode, but we're faced with these questions of who am I if I'm not what I do? Who am I if I'm not who I've always tried to be for others? Who am I if I no longer fit into my old life? Who am I really? A friend of mine once said to me, if you had no history and no future and no first name or last name, who are you? And it was the closest I ever felt at that time to who I truly am. That's the eternal self. And this is what we start to get to know more deeply in the dark night of the soul. For many people today, this is exactly what's happening. Everything, it all can feel lost in the dark night. We can feel like everything is going so wrong. The dark night strips away everything that you thought you needed, everything that isn't truly you. And it can feel terrifying, but it's necessary so that you can metamorphose into this incredibly amazing version of you that you never even knew was possible. Many people think that the dark night is about emotional turmoil, but it's actually a full body, full spirit transformation. There are mental and emotional symptoms, there are physical symptoms as well. Mentally and emotionally, we can feel confused and not know who we are, go through an identity crisis, question, what is happening to me, and even think that we're crazy, but you're not. We can feel disconnected from our purpose, from joy, from meaning. Everything might feel meaningless. I want you to know this is normal. We can feel a sense of loss and grief over the old self and the old way of life that we lived, and yet also kind of an aversion to the way things used to be. We can feel isolated and lonely because the old connections that we had aren't quite the right fit anymore. It's not because the people we loved and were connected with are a problem. We're just sort of being rearranged. And you'll find that at the other side, you end up having a new community. There's a deep craving for something more, but not knowing what exactly that is. This is a time of not needing to know. It's important to let go of the need to know. I have found I'm undergoing another dark night right now. I have found that long-term planning um, doesn't quite work out as well. It's a great time, however, to allow yourself to be creative and express, whether that's through painting, written word, singing, rather than trying to create an enormous project that you want to put forth in the world. This podcast, however, I had been working on for a while before starting, and I realized that if I'm doing it now, I'm expressing from my now moment experience of the dark night to actually even be able to sit here with you and say, it's okay. It's okay to be in the dark night. Excuse me. This isn't my first time. So for me, it's a lot easier. I've had several. And this one's going, I'm transitioning through this one with more grace and ease. It's still not fun. I don't love it. But excuse me, because I'm more surrendered, I do see it moving through me a lot more quickly than the one that I experienced for several years that started in 2015. One of the most overlooked aspects of the dark night is also how it affects the body. So we can go through weight changes. I'm going through that right now. Lucky me. Some people lose weight. Usually that happens towards the end of the experience, and some people gain weight. Um, Prior to the dark night, it's as though you've been acclimating a lot of new energies, higher frequency energies, light. I won't get into this too much in this episode. It's sort of a very quantum physics type conversation that I'm going to have to do a little more research around. But what I know from an intuitive level, what I see happen is there's a lot of light from the center of the cosmos through the sun that we acclimate, and we've been having a lot of solar flares in the past couple of years, and in 2024 they were pretty wild, pretty intense. And so we're acclimating to these light codes, we're integrating them into the body, and it it's as though it lights up the places where we haven't wanted to look, places we've been repressing and holding down, even in our cells, ancestral stuff of our lineage and simultaneous lifetimes. And then so with all of that light, then we start to purge it out, and we start to see things we didn't want to look at. We have to come face to face with what we've hidden from ourselves. And we then eventually we start to purge out a lot of cellular debris, the density that we've been holding on to that kept us at a particular vibrational frequency. Now we're lightening and brightening. And when we lighten and brighten in the beginning, when all of this light is coming in, my body sort of tries to compensate by putting on a lot of water weight, something that actually was part of my dark night of the soul in 2015 onward. That shattered an identity from me. It really put front and center my fear of not being loved, fear of not being accepted, fear of being judged. And it did to me what a dark night of the soul can often do, is it had me on my knees one night begging and crying to the universe, please make this stop. And I knew, I had this knowing, it's not going to stop as long as I keep fighting it. It's not going to stop as long as I keep trying to um, get love and acceptance through my physical appearance. I knew that everything would be taken away if I didn't surrender to this. And so in that moment, the only thing that I could do was accept how much grief I was feeling, how much sorrow, how much pain. And I wrapped my arms around myself and held myself on the floor and just let go and cried all the years of feeling not good enough, not lovable, not worthy. And that was a major turning point for me on that journey. Um, and there were stages of acceptance too. We can also go through sudden food sensitivities. Your mind, not your mind, your your body may reject foods you were able to tolerate in the past, but really were not so good for you anymore. Um, like processed foods, sugar, inflammatory foods. I'm not saying we don't want to start vilifying foods. We want to get honest with ourselves about what our body needs and what is maybe not so great for us. We don't want to go down the path of food fear, but this is a time when we want to really nurture and nourish ourselves a bit better than we have. We can experience nausea, exhaustion, headaches. We can go through a detox and not realize it. It feels like a flu. And you go to the doctor for answers and they can't find anything and they say you're fine, but something's off. There is a need for deep rest because your entire nervous system is recalibrating to all of the light that you're integrating. There is a pull towards silence, towards nature, or to solitude. And it's okay. One thing I'd like to caution you about is, of course, this feels like depression. It can feel like clinical depression. It can even look exactly like it. But if you go to a therapist, if you have a sense that you might be going through a dark night of the soul, please don't take on any pathologies. Is this a word? Pathologization? Don't let them pathologize you. I've had many clients come to me who are experiencing a dark night say that antidepressants didn't help them. It didn't help me either. I had old ones in my drawer from years prior. I started trying to take them. It didn't work. And I thought, well, it's probably because they're old, right? I called up the psychiatrist from years and years ago that had prescribed them and said, hey, I'm going through something now. Could I drop in and get another prescription? So I went to this appointment, even though at this point I wasn't a fan of antidepressants. I don't vilify them either. There was a time in my life they saved my life, honest to God. But they didn't work this time. I knew that they wouldn't, but I was looking for relief. Relief comes through acceptance, though, and not trying to fight what you're going through, which is an identity collapse. So there's a moment in the dark night when the identity that you built or identities you built no longer fit. And for some, this means realizing that you can't pretend anymore. You can't pretend that, if you've been living for validation and for external success, for approval, you can't, it's really hard to keep that going. Suddenly the masks start to feel unbearable. The roles you've played no longer make sense. It can feel like you've awakened from a video game or a play, and you're the only person in it who realizes it's just a play. And there's much less of a desire to be a part of it. In fact, once you awaken from it, it feels a little silly to keep going in the play. So like I said, some old friendships and relationships won't resonate anymore. And it can feel scary. So this is what the dark night of the soul demands from you. It's the courage to release who you thought you were, to become who you truly are. If you've been someone who gets what you want and what you need by manipulation, by bullying, that's going to start to feel really heavy. It's going to start to make you sick. It's going to stop working. Um, if you're somebody who is used to, well, I'll give you an example from the dark night that I'm going through today. It's about, for me right now, I'm learning to trust flow. I'm someone who has kind of lived in a subconscious way in survival mode my whole life. Pushing through and working really hard and feeling good about myself based on how hard I worked. Yesterday, I tried to record this episode. I had a plan. I was I was as I was recording and I had the outline, everything was in place. The universe had other plans. There was construction going on next door. There was pounding, hammering. The walls were literally shaking. Actually, one cracked. A message for me that my foundation, what I've been building my life on, has been cracking. I was hungry, I was exhausted and frustrated, and I tried to keep pushing through it. And it wasn't working. I played back the recording and you could hear all the noise. And I realized, first of all, you can't post this. I also realized that it was a test. I could have pushed through like I always have and re recorded when the hammering stopped, when the drilling and all of that stopped. Or I could listen to my body and surrender and allow there to be flow. I could get something to eat and go outside. So I went against my primal impulse and I chose to let go and listen to my body and trust that it wasn't the day to record. I chose to believe that if I surrender to the flow, everything's going to work out exactly as it's meant to. I don't have to do it all. A lot of the dark night of the soul is the realization that you are a co creator. You're not the sole creator of your life. There is an aspect of yourself that's not fully embodied, your higher self, soul self, whatever you want to call that. You are a co creator with it, with spirit. You do a part and it does a part. My whole life, I wanted to do it all. I didn't trust that the spirit part was going to support me. And because I didn't believe that it would, because I didn't trust, I often found myself um, lacking in support and burning out. So, this is what the dark night teaches us. We can fight it or we can let it shape us into something new. I'd like to guide you through a somatic experience to connect you with your soul self, higher self, spirit, whatever you want to call that. I'm going to rearrange the microphone here. After some recordings I've done recently, some people said to me, they make better microphones for podcasts and things of the sort that you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I've got one. It just doesn't sound right. This cheap microphone, I think I paid, well, back in the day, it was probably $7. I think they're 15 now. Works better than everything else I've tried. So yeah, it doesn't look cool, but the sound I think is exactly what I want it to be. So another thing that was mentioned is that I should wear glasses that don't reflect or that have a glare. I've got them. I do. But I can't see. I take notes. And I can't see with progressive lenses on. So I have my cheap glasses on for reading a screen. And hey, if you want, you can look at my notes in the reflection of my glasses. But let's take a moment to start to transition our awareness from our minds and our outer world to our inner world. If you're like me and you prefer to listen to podcasts on the go, that's great. That's fine. If you want to have this guided experience, you will need to take a seat and get comfortable. And if you have a candle nearby, great, we're going to use it. You don't have to. If you want to pause the recording and go grab one, you can. I should have told you that at the beginning of the video. But I'm going to light the candle, or imagine that you're lighting a candle. Just allowing the flame to represent the aspect of you that is eternal, that is never gone, never dies, that has brought you through every loss until now, and will remain even after you've navigated this dark night cycle. It's the you that exists into eternity even after your body is gone. The soul self, the eternal self. Just take a few moments to look at the flame. Be aware of this aspect within you. It's the aspect of you you perceive when you hear the still small voice, when your heart becomes lit, say if you're out in nature, or you're perceiving someone you love and you just feel this sensation of expansion in the heart. This eternal aspect of you, the portal to it, if you will, or the way to access all of the information that it can provide you, is right here in your heart. So I kind of think of it as the seat of my soul. And as you're looking at the flame, just take some time to do some nasal breathing. So they don't have to be deep breaths, but breathing in through your nose and elongate the exhale through your nose as well, ensuring that your exhale is at least a couple of counts longer than your inhale. And with each breath, allow your awareness to move a little more deeply into your body. If you are someone who does not feel safe doing that, then bring your awareness into your feet or your knees or your elbows. And you can gradually move your awareness towards where you feel emotion, just at the edge, just to feel a little tiny bit and work with that. For the rest of you, allow your awareness to drop fully into your body and begin to notice emotions that are present and where you're feeling them in your body. If you want to do a scan, go right ahead. Typically, we feel the majority of our emotions in the front of our torso, from our root to our neck. We also notice things in our head, but these here is where typically we feel emotions that we're able to identify. The ones we've been holding on to for a long time that get repressed tend to then move to the back of the body, where we can identify there's a physical sensation, but we don't know what emotion is connected to it. So we're noticing physical sensations, and we're also noticing emotions and where we're feeling them. And there may also be images and words. It's noticing all of what your human is experiencing. Giving yourself permission to be with that. The thoughts, the images, the sensations, the emotions. No matter how heavy or some may call negative, challenging these feelings are. You are not unspiritual, or it's not that you're not spiritual for feeling these. This is the human experience is so important and divine, and we can't just separate from it. To have a rebirth experience, we've got to allow it, feel it, be present with all of it. Be aware of all of the thoughts moving through your mind. And you don't have to try and stop them. Just allow them. Notice them. And then what you're going to do is invite all of what you're experiencing to come into your heart. You're not trying to get rid of anything, but it's as though there is this eternal you, eternal love, wrapping its arms around all of what you're experiencing, letting your mind sink down into your heart and witness and be present to all of what the human is experiencing. And in a very motherly or fatherly way, in a very compassionate way, say to the human, to the ego, to the emotions, words, images, physical sensations, I see you, and I feel you, and I'm with you. You've gone from identifying as the human with all of the thoughts and the feelings and the physical sensations and the images to now identifying as the soul or essence, spirit, the eternal you, who's holding space for the human with love, patience, and compassion. And then you're going to melt the two into each other. The divine you in the human you. Letting the two melt into each other. And take a deep breath. Each day that you practice this, you become more and more identified with the divine self. You're not bypassing or escaping the human. You need to go back and forth between feeling the humanness and being the divine. And if I were sitting here with you longer, I would actually bring you back to human again, who's seeking the comfort and the patience and the love and compassion of the divine self. And then I would bring you back to the divine self who's holding space for loving and comforting the human self. You can go back and forth between the two a few times and then let both melt into each other. And each day you will embody a little more and a little more of your divine self that for so long had lived above, mostly outside of you. It was within, but you're embodying more and more of it now. You are becoming something so much more expanded. The dark night of the soul is not about losing yourself. It's about losing what was never really you. Never really you to begin with. The story that you lived, it was all an experience, a beautiful human experience, but it's not who you are. And if you're in a dark night of the soul right now, know this, okay? It is temporary. You will feel joy again. You will feel a sense of purpose again. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to worry how long it'll take. The more you can kind of surrender and let go to this process, the easier it's going to be for you. And you are not abandoned. In fact, quite the opposite. You are being found. You are finding yourself. Take care until next time.